Should black people get reparations?
I think there has to be some form of reparations, and we can discuss what that is.
Where do you stand on some form of reparations for black people?
We have a history of racism in America.
So you are for some type of
Yes, I am.
reparation? Okay.
Yes, I am.
Everybody should end up in the same place. And since we didn't start in the same place, some folks might need more. Giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place. People in our country are having an experience that is not equal.
If elected, will you be supporting change in dietary guidelines?
So the answer is yes. But I'll also say this: the balance that we have to strike here, frankly, is about what government can and should do around creating incentives and then banning certain behavior.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. So again, back to the United States Congress, here's my point. If they fail to act as President of the United States, I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. I'm going to first attempt to work across the aisle, but if we don't see any traction there, yes, I will take executive action, and yes, I will do whatever is necessary.
So will everyone have to drive electric cars?
Well, by my plan, by 2045, we will have basically zero emission vehicles, only 100%. By 2045.
All right.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So, yeah, and starting with what we can do on day one around public lands, right?
So would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes, and I've, again, worked on that. We're going to be taking on powerful interests. But I've always believed that we should expand what's on those cans of those things that you buy in the grocery store. We should expand the list, and included in that should be a measure of the impact on the environment.
Just to try to understand what that is. So it's going to go on big companies, right?
Yeah.
They're going to pay this fee.
Yeah.
But how do you make sure that they don't do what they will try to do, which is immediately pass that on to consumers?
Well, we're going to do it in a way that is about what we've always done with industry, which is to say that there has to be some connection between the fee and bad behaviors, and there has to be, in that we have to monitor whether it's going to be passed on to consumers. But I'm going to tell you that should never be the reason not to actually put a fee, and in particular, a carbon fee. So
Right.
Part of my plan is that we will require all elements of industry to actually score, and they will be scored based on the carbon imprint that their business creates. And we will score that. So again, that industry, that business, and we can all be aware of and measure the impact of their behavior on the environment.
What week of pregnancy should abortion access be cut off?
We need to restore the protections of Roe versus Wade. We're not trying to do something new.
Well, that was nebulous because it was about viability, which could be anywhere between 20 to 24 weeks. And
So no. Let me be very clear.
The Women's Health Protection Act that the White House also
endorsed. Let me be very
endorsed.
clear. From day one, the president has been clear. I have been clear. We need to put back the protections that are in Roe v. Wade into law. Since the Supreme Court took it, Congress has the power and ability to pass legislation to put those protections back in law, and Joe Biden will sign that bill. So that is what we want. The point is,
But do you need to be more precise?
I am being precise. We need to put into law the protections of Roe versus Wade, and that is about going back to where we were before the Dobbs decision.
Why do you think it shouldn't be specific? You know, out in New Mexico, for example, the governor there says it shouldn't be nailed down to a week because it should be a private matter between a woman and her doctor. There shouldn't be a precise number put on that. Is that what you believe as well?
I believe that we should put the protections of Roe v. Wade into law. I believe the solution, and I'm actually feel very strongly about this, is that we need to have Medicare for all. What we know is that
to live in a civil society, to be true to the ideals and the spirit of who we say we are as a country, we have to appreciate and understand that access to health care it should not be thought of as a privilege. It should be understood to be a right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, to reiterate, you support the Medicare for All bill, I think initially co-sponsored by Senator Bernie Sanders. You're also a co-sponsor on it. I believe it will totally eliminate private insurance. So for people out there who like their insurance, they don't get to keep it?
Well, listen, the idea is that everyone gets access to medical care. And you don't have to go through the process of going through an insurance company, having them give you approval, going through the paperwork, all of the delay that may require. Who of us has not had that situation where you got to wait for approval and the doctor says, well, I don't know if your insurance company is going to cover this? Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on.
Biden saying there's no constitutional authority to issue that executive order when they say I'm going to eliminate assault weapons, saying you can't do it by executive order any more than Trump can do things when he says he can do it by executive order. Does the vice president have a point there?
Some things you can, many things you can't.
Let's let the senator answer.
Well, I mean, I would just say, hey, Joe, instead of saying no, we can't, let's say yes, we can.
Let's be constitutional.
And I will ban by executive order the importation of assault weapons.
What would you do about the millions of, specifically, assault weapons that are already in circulation? What do you do about those?
Well, there are approximately 5 million, to your point, Craig. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program. It's got to be smart. We've got to do it the right way. But there are 5 million at least, some estimate as many as 10 million. And we're going to have smart public policy that's about taking those off the streets.
I do believe that we need to do buybacks, and I'll tell you why. They are weapons of war with no place on the streets of a civil society.
If by my 100th day in office, when elected President of the United States, the United States Congress fails to put a bill on my desk to sign with all of the good ideas or any of the good ideas, then I am prepared to take executive action because that's what's needed.
Executive action to do what?
To do specifically for anyone who sells more than 5 guns a year, they will be required to perform background checks on the people they sell them to. And this will be the most comprehensive background check policy that has ever been had in our country thus far.
Can that be done by executive order?
Yes. Yes, it can.
It is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street.
Crime surging in Democrat-led cities that slashed police funding last year.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.
Biden administration has imposed tight Buy America provisions in large spending bills such as the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act. All of these policies ask Americans to pay more to achieve certain political goals.
Some experts doubt whether the act caused the cool down, pointing instead to the Fed's rate hikes and supply chains running more smoothly. President Biden regretting the law's name at a fundraiser Thursday, saying, quote, "I wish I hadn't called it that because it has less to do with reducing inflation than it does to do with dealing with providing for alternatives that generate economic growth."
If you'd be so kind, raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross a border without documentation. Can we keep the hands up so we can see them?
We have to keep, let me just be very clear. We have to have a secure border, but I am in favor of saying that we're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct. That is correct.
You support giving universal health care, Medicare for all, to people who are in this country illegally?
Let me just be very clear about this. I am opposed to any policy that would deny in our country any human being from access to public safety, public education, or public health, period.
Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels between
I'm talking about perception.
Officers and agents.
I'm talking about perception.
I do not see a parallel between what is constitutionally mandated as it relates to enforcing the law.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
I see no
Are you aware that there's a
that puts
perception?
ICE in the same category as the KKK.
Do you have plans to visit the border?
Not today.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
I have been privileged and proud to serve as Vice President of the United States with Joe Biden as President of the United States. And what I saw of that report last night, I believe is, as a former prosecutor, the comments that were made by that prosecutor, gratuitous, inaccurate, and inappropriate.
More than half the women in my cabinet, more than half the people in my cabinet, more than half the women in my administration are women. If it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway.
So the way that the president's demeanor in that report was characterized could not be more wrong on the facts and clearly politically motivated.
You know, the rapidly rising I don't know. As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
And so I will say that when it comes to the role and responsibility of a prosecutor in a situation like that, we should expect that there would be a higher level of integrity than what we saw.
I mean, you debated against then Vice President Vice President Biden 4 years ago, and he was a very different person on the stage 4 years ago when you debated him. You must, I mean, that's certainly true, is it not?
Anderson, the point has to be performance in terms of what a president does. A president who incites an insurrection against the Capitol. No, but I got the point that you're making about a 1.5 hour debate tonight. I'm talking about 3.5 years of performance in work that has been historic.
But
whether it be infrastructure,
the man who we saw on the stage tonight, is that the other guy on the debate stage?
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. Excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump
was right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death.
So I'm not going to spend all night with you talking about the last 90 minutes when I've been watching the last 3.5 years of performance.
President Biden always said that he wants you to be the last person in the room, particularly for big decisions, just as he was for President Obama. He just made a really big decision. Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do.
We all watched the television coverage of just yesterday. That's on top of everything else that we know and don't know yet, based on what we've just been able to see. And because we've seen it or not doesn't mean it hasn't happened.